Hello and welcome everyone to our November 9th Planning and Zoning Board public hearing. We're grateful for all those who can participate with us today. This will be a special board meeting as we have one item on the agenda that required this meeting. So we wanted to make sure and have that for the public and give them the opportunity to review and speak on these items today. Let's go ahead and do a roll call. Chair Astle is here. Vice Chair Sarkisian.
Here.
Board Member Boyle.
I'm here.
Board Member Allen is absent. Board Member Crockett.
Here.
Board Member Villanueva Saucedo is also absent. Board Member Ayers. I think you're muted.
Here.
Thank you. Well, great. Yeah, we have Board Member Allen and Board Member Villanueva Saucedo absent today, but we have quorum and we'll go ahead and move forward with the items. So today's meeting does not include a consent agenda, so we'll begin with item 2A, which is a minor general plan amendment, chapters 7 and 16, and maybe we can just go right on ahead and turn the time over to staff to open up this case and begin the discussion, if that's all right.
Chair, members of the board, that's all right. As you recollect, we've been having discussions with the board about certain ambiguities in the general plan and issues that we are having with implementing the general plan. So we did have this extensive discussion back in February with City Council and with the Planning and Zoning Board as part of the requirement for us to do a 3-year annual review of the general plan and also our yearly requirement to really do evaluation of the general plan. So through that evaluation discussion with you and City Council, we are here to make final recommendation of certain proposed changes to the plan. So with that, I'll pass it on to Rachel.
Hey, can everybody hear me? It looks like I unmuted earlier.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good afternoon, Chair, members of the board. As Nana was introducing, we are finally here with our recommendations for the general plan amendments. So this is the first of the 2 required hearings that we need to have for planning and zoning before we go to City Council. And that's just to make sure that we have sufficient public participation. So having hearings on 2 different dates and locations. So I heard a question earlier about the chapters that were sent out. So those are actually the final chapters with all the changes included in them. They are not substantially different from what you've seen previously. There is like maybe a word or 2 that has changed in the last couple months since we sent those around for review. But just to kind of get started here, Leslie's going to be running my PowerPoint for me. I'm kind of in a mid-quarantine till I get a test back. So just to kind of, to start off, we're going to talk about the purpose of the general plan, go over that comprehensive review that Nana had mentioned back in February that we did, and then present to our recommendations. So as we've been discussing the last several months, the general plan it's really the official policy document of the city that guides development. This plan also provides continuity over time. So as staff members and as board members and city council members change, you still have that continuity in decision making. It is also a fulfillment of the city charter and is required by state statute. So the comprehensive plan is required in our general plan. It's not a requirement of state statute, but it is something that was written into our general plan in chapter 16, and we're required every 3 years to conduct a comprehensive review. And what this does is this gives us an opportunity to look at the challenges and the successes of how we've been implementing the plan. And it also provides us an opportunity to make recommendations for amendments to the plan. So when we did this comprehensive evaluation, we identified 2 areas that really could benefit from improvement. And those form the basis of our recommendation is amendments to Chapter 7, which is community character, and Chapter 16, which is plan implementation and amendments. So chapter 7 really is that future land use guiding chapter. It doesn't look at the city in a parcel specific case, but it really focuses on the character of areas instead. So part of the general plan, one of the main focuses was really trying to create this sense of place in the city and get away from this sense of Mesa just being a bedroom community that doesn't have any sense of identity. So with this, what they developed as their future land use guidance was creating these different districts that really focusing on different characters. Those combine concepts of land use, zoning, built form, and intensity. So we can scroll on to the next one. So on this screen, you can see the different character areas throughout the city. Some of those are very kind of specific as in neighborhoods. You can imagine that that's mostly for residential development. Leslie, can you go to the next slide? But several of those character areas really do, they focus on this concept of mixed use development. So even when we have certain character areas such as the employment districts where it may seem like it's very specific to employment type uses, the plan is very cognizant in trying to allow for secondary uses to provide those additional services that are needed to support different uses. So the employment district, that's just one use, but of course, as you can see, a mixed use activity district or a mixed use community, at the heart of that is really creating that mixed use center that has that great sense of place. So here, just kind of adding on to that, the intent is creating this sense of place. This really allows for many different uses. It allows for a more efficient use of space and encourages alternative modes of transportation. But some of the challenges that we have seen in implementing this is that the general plan was not very specific in how it outlined how these character areas should develop. So within chapter 7, there is a list of primary zoning and secondary zoning that is supposed to be used by each of those character areas. And then before these recommendations, there was also a list of just typical land uses. So land uses that are envisioned to be within those character areas. But what we saw as a result is that we had a lot of challenges from the development community where they said, well, you know, what we consider to be inherently secondary and supporting uses. So if you're thinking about a mixed use activity center, obviously that's going to have a big commercial component. It's going to have, you know, opportunities for some residential and some employment. But some of the development community is really taking that as, well, it allows for residential, so I can develop the whole thing as residential. I don't have to provide this mixture of uses since this is one of the allowed uses within the district. So it really did create that challenge there of implementing those character areas and informing some of our rezoning actions. So can we go to the next slide? Okay. So this slide is some data from the Maricopa County or Maricopa Association of Governments from MAG. And I know this graph was a little confusing to planning and zoning the last time we showed it because you didn't have the context. We had shown it to City Council previously and discussed it. But what this is this is our current land use within the city. And this is data from 2017 and 2019. And why we're showing this to you is it just kind of shows our mixture of land uses within the city and showing that we have a pretty good distribution. And at the time we expressed some concern to City Council about how we are seeing this trend of more residential and from that being pulled from some of our mixed use character areas. So as you can see, over the past 2 years, there has been an increase in residential development. That's mostly coming from the vacant land, which would make sense as new development comes in. Leslie, can you go to the next slide? But what we were seeing anecdotally was really supported by their data as well. So when you looked at, in comparison to the current land use, when you looked at our future land use designations and how that has changed, that increase in residential development has really came from those mixed use areas. So we did see the support of that in the data. So So what we are recommending is some text amendments to Chapter 7 to better describe the intent of those character areas. And then along with that, we are recommending that there be minimum percentages for the primary zoning and the land uses that are specified for those character areas. So on the screen, you're seeing the minimum percentages of the zoning districts that would be required. So neighborhood village, where we're suggesting 80% needs to be the primary zoning district. Mixed use activity, we're suggesting 70%. Employment, we have several different subtypes that each kind of have a unique characteristic. So if you think of, a business park versus an employment core, a business park is more of your kind of suburban, kind of commercial center, as opposed to an employment core, which is more of a downtown environment. So those have some specific suggestions there. And then lastly, for mixed use community, that's like your Eastmark and your Cadence. Those are very unique character areas, and there is only one zoning district that you can use to establish that character area, and that's the planned community zoning district. And what that is a very tailored zoning where the developer comes in and they set what are going to be the allowed land uses in there, what are their kind of development standards. So they, in sense, are creating their own specific zoning regulations within that district. So as that, we're not stipulating what the land uses are. We're not stipulating a certain zoning district. But what we heard from council is that there really needs to be an emphasis on providing that commercial use within those districts. And so when we were last visiting with council to present our recommendations to them, they asked that we include a minimum percentage for commercial uses within those planned community districts. So that would be your 40% would have to be dedicated to a commercial use within those areas. So that is Chapter 7. And then moving on to the second part of our recommendation is Chapter 16, which is Plan Implementation and Amendment. So this chapter talks about all the different implementation tools that the general plan has. So that would be, for instance, like your zoning ordinance, your CIP, your sub-area plans. This also gives you all of the goals and strategies that were outlined in all the previous chapters. It dictates the process for reviewing and updating the plan, and it also provides the process for plan amendments. So when we evaluated this chapter, one thing that has been very apparent to us over the years is that there has been a lot of vagueness in the language around the plan amendments and what constitute a major versus a minor plan amendment. We also recognize that it did not really consider the context of an area when we talk about the built environment and the difference between, downtown, which is a very developed, fine-grained density, versus out east, which is undeveloped and really ripe for any development. So what we're recommending here is, once again, to refine that text to better describe the process. We are recommending that we create context-specific amendment requirements, and then to provide additional approval criteria. So if we go to the next slide. So when we talk about some benchmarks or for amendment criteria, we're talking about that cutoff of what constitutes a major versus a minor plan amendment. So for the city of Mesa, currently, if you have something that is not in compliance with the character area, so if you are proposing a development that's not in compliance with whatever that character area is, if it's greater than 320 acres, that kicks it into a major amendment. That can be heard once a year. It's a little bit more of an entailed process. So they all apply at one time, they all get heard at one time. And then on the screen, you can see that we went out and kind of looked and saw what other communities within, what other municipalities within the Arizona region were using. And we were by far, the largest as far as that criteria. So that was something that we really wanted to keep in context when we were suggesting some revisions. So if you go on to the next slide. Leslie, so what we came up with is first to address the context specific issue is to create a different designation for what is a major amendment in the downtown and transit districts specifically. So what we're recommending there is that anything that over 10 acres in the downtown or the transit districts be considered a major amendment. And that's equal to an average city block in downtown. So as we see it, if you were to take a city block in downtown and try to change it out of that character area, that would be a major impact to the city. Whereas if you were gonna do that out east somewhere, if you were gonna take a 10-acre parcel out east, not so impactful. But then our other recommendation is that we lower that criteria for the major amendment down to 160 acres as well, just to be more in line with the rest of the valley. That still is quite a substantial area of land. So then, as part of this, we've been doing outreach throughout the year. So this started, like we were discussing back in February, where we went to City Council. We were talking about this with you all back in March. We've met with the Developers Advisory Committee a couple times. We had our special projects webpage, shows special project open houses. So really, that's our outreach there. We could go to the next slide. And our next step, we're finally wrapping up. So after these two hearings that we'll be having with planning and zoning, we'd be going to City Council for their consideration on December 8th. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about proposals.
No, I appreciate your comments. That's very important. And we've noticed over the years, all of these come to head. We've seen so many meetings where these clarifications have been needed. So any comments or questions from the board?
Chair, I have a couple of questions.
Board Member Sarkisian, please.
Back on the first section presentation, I just wanted some clarification on the...
Chapter 7?
Yes. Going back, there, that one. Back over. The next, yeah, that one. So with the question being, I know what the intent is, but like for instance, in mixed use community and in business park, like for neighborhood village, since that is such a big portion of Mesa's land uses, when you say minimum percentage of primary zoning and land uses, so how is that going to be affected if I think you went over part of it for like mixed use community, but I was wondering for neighborhood village, because that also allows commercial in it. If, for instance, properties come in that are only a single family community, how does that stack up to the 80%? Do you ask them to do a portion of commercial, or do you just keep track of how much of your neighborhood village designations are active residential? How does that work?
Sure. So Chair Astle, Board Member Sarkisian. So there's kind of two scenarios under which they can meet these criteria. So the first would be that already the maximum percentage of the neighborhood character or the neighborhood village area has already been developed for say one of the primary uses. So let's just say in general commercial. So 80% of it's already been developed as commercial. In that case, if someone came in with a residential proposal, they would be able to go ahead and apply for that rezoning. It would be supported by staff because it's meeting those minimum percentages. The second scenario would be if it was a completely undeveloped character area. At that point, since that minimum use of the zoning and the land use has not been established yet, the applicant themselves would have to either come in with a full 100% of the primary zoning and land use, or they would have to bring us a development that has the 80% minimum within and then 20% secondary.
And so how does that work when you don't have these larger properties? I'm just concerned that you're going to be triggering a lot of
Meaning if a
Re- re-
1 acre parcel comes to a
Right.
commercial corner and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to mix, is that kind of what you're getting at?
Well, yeah, and you're gonna trigger, my concern is that you're gonna trigger these other developments that are gonna need to come in for minor general plan amendments a bunch of times, and it's gonna be and it might feel more piecemeal than cohesive if it was like a larger group. I know you guys went over the I don't know if it's probably tied into the amendment criteria, implementation chapter, or, I know you kind of tied over, but just trying to figure out, I'm just concerned that it might be a little piecemeal, and we're trying to make everything come together, and then it might prohibit some people from coming in, because then it triggers a general plan amendment.
Leslie, can you scroll up to the map of the character areas?
Rachel, Chair, members of the board, to answer your question, so the main intent here is basically how do we achieve the goals for the character area designation? Right now, the way the general plan is written, we are totally moving away from achieving the intent of those character area designation because it's so vague. And the challenges that we are having, as Rachel said earlier on, we are having proposals coming, especially one of the major issues is residential, where there is no defined percentage for primary, which if you look at the intent of those character area designations, is the primary that is going to establish the character designations with the secondary uses being ancillary. So back to the question as to if somebody comes in and they are not able to meet those percentages, well, if you come in and you're going to go through the rezoning, you have to go through the rezoning process anyway. Council has a discretion as part of the rezoning to consider based on the peculiar nature of the development, and it's not going to add additional process to the process they have to go through anyway, unless it's more than 160 acres for most of the areas that we're going to see those changes. So there is the opening valve to be able to review that, but at least what we are proposing is it provides that clarity and it provides that kind of path whenever we get a proposal to be able to convey to the development community or whoever that this is the intent of the character designation and these are the primary. You either have to meet that or look at the surrounding, and if it meets that, then you can move forward. But if we look at all those options and there's so opportunity for certain change, as you're going through the rezoning case, the council will have the opportunity to approve the project based on the criteria.
Okay. So, yeah, okay. So I see it's like, on top of that, it's policy related versus ordinance too. So you guys have the authority and council and staff can, measure things back and forth.
Absolutely, because this is not codifying the zoning ordinance. This is more
Okay.
of the general plan policy guidance.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Any other comments from board members or questions? Do we have any neighborhood members or community members that have logged in that we're aware of that would like time to speak?
Chair, we have not received anything to date.
Thank you. Good to know. Okay. Any other comments from the board or from staff? And I know today we don't necessarily have any action as much as this needed to be presented and our concerns discussed. And I think at this point we've had opportunities and I think we're all pretty close to understanding where this is going and we're excited about it. So anything else? Okay. Thank you so much, Rachel, for your time. I appreciate the presentation. It's very, very helpful. Okay, Nana, maybe I'll turn the time over to you if there's anything, updates or anything you'd like to go over prior to finishing up our meeting today.
Chair, board members, I have no other comments. We will see you on November 18th. Becky, is that correct? 3 p.m.
Okay.
on November 18th. Thank you.
Great.
Perfect. Thanks so much. All right, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion to adjourn our meeting.
I will move that we adjourn the meeting, Chair Astle.
Thank you, Board Member Crockett. Any second?
I'll second.
All right.
I'll third it then.
Sarkisian and Board Member Boyle. So at this point, let's all vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Well, I appreciate you all being here. We'll talk to you very soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.